Hello, friends. Tonight, we're going to listen to a peaceful story that will help you relax and drift into a deep, soothing sleep. Before we begin, make sure your bed is comfortable and dim the lights. Close your eyes, take slow, deep breaths, and with each breath, feel yourself becoming more and more at ease. Let the calm atmosphere surround you, easing your mind and body. Now, allow yourself to be completely carried away on this peaceful journey. Let's begin the story. Not the kind that follows peace, but the kind that feels alive. A silence that waits, breathes, and listens. The village of Darnwell, hidden in the folds of gray hills and whispering trees, had always been a place of gentle sounds. A rooster's cry before dawn, the creak of water wheels, the laughter of children chasing hens through the dust. But that morning, all of it was gone. The well stood still, the birds hid, and the wind refused to move. Elara noticed it first. She had risen before sunrise, as she always did, to grind herbs and warm water for her patients. The steam that rose from her copper pot looked heavier than usual, curling too slowly, like breath in cold air. When she stepped outside, the air felt thick, as if the world had been holding its breath all night. She walked toward the well, carrying her wooden bucket. The stones under her feet were damp, though it hadn't rained. A faint hum hung in the air, not sound exactly, but a trembling feeling inside the chest. When she reached the square, she saw it. Old Mrs. Kellen sat beside the well, her head tilted to the side, eyes wide open. She wasn't moving. Her gray hair fluttered slightly in the faint breeze that finally arrived. The bucket beside her had spilled, its water dark and muddy, as though it came from deep beneath the earth. Elara knelt down. Mrs. Kellen was breathing, but just barely. Her chest rose and fell in short, uneven motions, her lips whispering something too soft to hear. The voice came from behind her. Father Doran, the village priest, stood in his black cloak, the wooden cross hanging against his chest. His face was pale. "It began last night," he said quietly. "3 others the same. Their bodies shake as if cold, but they do not wake. Their eyes stay open." Elara touched Mrs. Kellen's wrist. It was burning hot. "It's not a fever," she said. "Not like any I've seen." Father Doran looked at the sky. "It's the hand of heaven," he whispered. "Punishment for our pride." But Elara didn't believe in punishment. She believed in causes, roots, herbs, poisons, and cures. Her mother had taught her that even the cruelest sickness had a pattern. But as she stared at Mrs. Kellen's face, she saw no pattern, only fear. By nightfall, 6 more had fallen. Elara worked through the dark hours, grinding herbs and heating stones. She mixed honey with willow bark, pressed damp cloths to their foreheads, and prayed silently. Not to any god, but to the human spirit, to the strength that hides beneath suffering. But each treatment failed. The sick didn't scream or cough. They only trembled, as though listening to something that no one else could hear. By the 3rd night, the village smelled of burning herbs and candle wax. Every window flickered with desperate light. The church bells rang not for prayer, but for warning. And still, the silence remained. On the 4th morning, Elara walked to the edge of the fields, where the fog clung low and cold. There she found a young man named Jareth, sitting beside a dying fire. His skin was pale, his lips cracked. "Do you hear it?" he asked without looking at her. "Hear what?" "The breath," he whispered. "It's not the wind. It moves through the houses. It watches us." Elara sat beside him, wrapping her shawl tighter. The fog swirled slowly between them, carrying a faint scent, like old rain mixed with ash. She placed a hand on his forehead. His skin pulsed under her fingers, too warm, too alive. "Try to sleep," she said softly. He smiled faintly. I haven't slept since the first bell. She didn't know what he meant until that night. When the last bell stopped ringing, something changed in the air. The fog thickened and the candles in her cottage flickered blue for a moment. The sound of footsteps came from outside, slow, dragging, uneven. Elara opened her door. No one stood there, but she felt warmth, as if someone had just passed. The grass near the gate moved slightly, bending though no wind touched it. She followed the path to the church. The great wooden doors were open. Inside, the pews were empty except for Father Doran, kneeling before the altar, his hands trembling. Dozens of candles burned, their flames swaying toward the same direction, as if drawn by a breath too large to belong to any human. "Father," she said, stepping closer. He turned. His eyes were red, not from tears, but from lack of sleep. "They say the sickness speaks," he murmured. "They hear it in their dreams. Voices calling from under the ground." "It's no spirit," Elara said, though her voice shook. "It's an illness. It has to be." "Then why does it stop the wind?" he asked. She had no answer. Days bled into nights. The villagers stopped working. They stayed inside, whispering prayers into jars of water, leaving them by the windows so the hand of heaven might pass over. Children drew symbols in ash across their doors. The church bells no longer rang. Father Doran had forbidden it, saying sound only fed the sickness. Elara kept searching for a cure. She studied the soil, the water, the air. Everything tasted faintly of iron. Even the bread smelled wrong, sweet but sour at the same time. Then one evening, as she crushed herbs near her window, she saw a strange shimmer in the field, a faint ripple moving through the grass though the air was still. She stepped outside. Something was breathing. Not the wind, not the trees. It pulsed once, slow like a heartbeat beneath the earth. She froze, her bucket slipping from her hand. The ripple passed beneath her feet, moving toward the village square. She followed, her heart echoing that deep rhythm. When she reached the square, the well was glowing faintly. The water inside shimmered like mercury, reflecting the pale moonlight, even though no moon was visible. She leaned closer. Her reflection was gone. Instead, she saw faces, blurred, moving just below the surface. The faces of those who had fallen sick. Eyes open, lips moving, though no sound came out. Elara. Her name rippled through the water, soft and distant, as though whispered from deep within. She stumbled back. Then, as quickly as it began, the glow faded. The water turned still. The faces were gone. She stood there for a long time, breathing hard. When she finally looked up, she saw Father Doran standing in the doorway of the church. "You've seen it," he said. It wasn't a question. "What is it?" He looked at the ground. "Not what, child?" That night, the fog returned. It crept through cracks in the walls, across the fields, between the beds of the sick. It touched every face and lingered, heavy and slow. Elara sat by the window, candlelight trembling beside her. The flames stretched sideways, as if drawn towards something unseen. The sound came again, soft, rhythmic, like 1,000 breaths layered together. In that moment, she understood what Jareth meant. The air itself was changing. The sickness wasn't spreading through touch or food. It was in the breath, invisible, alive, ancient, and it was listening. By dawn, the fog began to thin, leaving the world soaked in gray. Birds didn't return. Dogs didn't bark. The wells gave no reflection. Elara walked to the edge of the forest and stopped. The silence there was deeper than any prayer. Something vast was awake beneath the soil, something that had waited centuries to be remembered. And now, it had begun to breathe again. The fog had not lifted since the first fever. It hung over darn well like a second skin, soft, gray, and almost alive. It blurred the edges of the world until even the church spire seemed to float above the rooftops like a memory. For 3 days, the village had lived between waking and dreaming. People no longer spoke in full sentences. They whispered in fragments, as though words might attract whatever watched from behind the mist. Elara hadn't slept. The small flame that burned inside her cottage had become her only companion. She kept it alive night after night, feeding it with candle wax and bits of parchment from old prayer scrolls. Sometimes, when she stared into the flame too long, she thought she saw something move inside it, the reflection of eyes that weren't hers. Outside, the wells had grown restless. It began with small ripples that appeared even on windless days. Then came the whispers, soft sighs that rose with the steam of early morning. By the 4th night, the villagers gathered around the largest well in the square. Someone said the water was glowing again. Elara tried to stop them. "Don't touch it," she said, her voice trembling in the heavy air. "It's not holy. It's sick, but fear is a kind of faith." Father Doran stood beside the well, holding a wooden cross. His eyes were sunken, his skin the color of parchment. "We have prayed for mercy," he said, "and heaven has answered. The dead speak to us through this water. They offer peace to those who believe." The villagers bowed their heads. A young woman stepped forward first. Her name was Maureen. She had lost her husband only a week ago to the fever. Her hands shook as she filled the cup from the well. "Elara," she whispered, turning to the healer. "He called me last night. He said he was waiting." Elara's heart clenched. "Don't drink it," she begged. "It isn't him." But Maureen smiled, that fragile, broken smile only grief can make, and raised the cup to her lips. The water looked clear under the torchlight. It shimmered faintly, like a sky just before dawn. She drank it in one breath. Then she closed her eyes. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her chest rose sharply, as if something had entered her. Her lips parted, and a soft sigh escaped. Too long, too deep to be human. And when she opened her eyes again, they were blank. By morning, she was dead, but her face wore a calm, almost joyful expression. Elara buried her at sunrise. The earth was wet, as if weeping. She wanted to burn the well, to fill it with stones and ashes, but Father Doran forbade it. "You will not silence heaven," he said. "You will not defy the hand that heals." "Heals?" she spat. "She's dead. Death is a cure," he whispered and walked away. That day, more villagers came to drink. Old men with trembling hands, mothers clutching their sick children, the hopeless, the desperate. The water shimmered for each of them, as though recognizing its next breath. By the end of the week, 12 more were gone, all wearing the same peaceful smile. At night, the wells spoke. Elara heard them from her window, faint murmurs rising from beneath the stones, layered with the soft gurgle of unseen movement. Sometimes she thought she heard names. Once, she thought she heard her own. She began sleeping with the door bolted and her face covered with a damp cloth, afraid the air itself carried the sickness. But even then, dreams slipped in. In one of them, she stood beside the well again. The water was black, still, endless. A voice, deep and echoing, whispered from below, "You keep us thirsty." She tried to speak, but her throat was dry. The voice continued, closer now. "You heal what must remain open. You silence what must sing." She looked down. The surface of the water broke apart, and hundreds of faces stared up. Faces of the dead, eyes unblinking. Their lips moved in unison. "Breathe." She woke choking. The next morning, Father Doran came to her cottage. His hands were trembling. He looked thinner, almost transparent. "Elara," he said quietly, "the sickness is changing." She stared at him. "Changing how?" "They are not dying anymore," he said. "They are resting." "What does that mean?" He hesitated. "Come and see." She followed him to the churchyard. Beneath the old oak tree lay 3 villagers she had treated before, pale, motionless, eyes closed. "They've been like this since last night," Doran whispered. "They breathe, but they do not wake. The people say heaven has claimed them halfway." Elara knelt beside the nearest body and touched his wrist. The skin was cool, but a faint pulse throbbed beneath. The man's lips twitched as if mouthing something soundless. She leaned closer. A warm breath escaped his mouth, faint, steady, rhythmic. It smelled of the well water. That night, the fog thickened again, so dense it seemed to hum. The church bells were silent, yet an echo of them hung in the air, as if sound itself refused to die. Elara sat at her desk, writing notes by candlelight. The sickness spreads through the air, through faith, not flesh. The water carries something unseen. Not poison, not spirit, but memory. Her pen scratched softly across the paper. Then it stopped. From outside came a faint sound, the creak of a bucket rope. She froze. The village square was empty. No one would dare fetch water after dark. The sound came again, slow, dragging, rhythmic. She opened her door. The fog brushed her face like a hand. Through it, she saw the well. The bucket was rising on its own. Step by step, the rope wound upward, squealing softly as it turned. The bucket broke the surface, spilling silver droplets that glowed faintly in the dark. She took a step closer. The water inside the bucket shimmered, and then it breathed. Tiny ripples pulsed outward, in and out, the same rhythm as a human chest. She dropped her candle. It hit the ground, went out, and for one heartbeat, everything vanished into darkness. Then a whisper, "Drink, Elara." She stumbled back, heart pounding, and ran inside. The door slammed behind her. All night, the whisper followed her from the window, the floorboards, the walls. It was not a single voice anymore, but many. Men, women, children, all murmuring one word again and again. "Breathe." By dawn, her ears were ringing with silence. The voices had stopped. She stepped outside. The well stood still again, its rope hanging limp. No glow, no sound, just stillness. But as she passed, she saw something carved into the stone, a word fresh and wet, as if written by water itself. That morning, Father Doran rang the church bell again for the first time in weeks. The villagers gathered in the square, their faces pale, eyes hollow. "The fever has passed," he declared. "The dead have found peace. The water has cleansed us." They murmured in agreement, relief flooding their voices. But Elara watched the air. It shimmered faintly, moving like heat over stone. And in the corner of her eye, she thought she saw Marine, the first woman who had drunk the sacred water, standing among the crowd, smiling softly, her skin pale as fog. When she blinked, the figure was gone. Only the echo of that smile remained, calm, content, and utterly still. That night, Elara could not sleep. She sat at her table, staring at the candle flame. The wax had begun to curl backward, melting against gravity, forming the shape of a tear. Outside, the fog drifted across the rooftops like a living thing. And somewhere beneath it, in the heart of the well, something sighed, not in pain, but in satisfaction. The dead had learned to breathe again. The night had grown heavier since the last funeral. Smoke from incense still hung in the air, curling through the cracks of the church ceiling like ghosts trying to escape. Elara sat in the shadows of the altar, her trembling hands still stained with the ash of the dead. Outside, the wind whispered through the old stone lanes, soft, mournful, almost human. Somewhere in that sound, she could still hear the coughs, the whispers, the cries of mothers clutching cold children. The fever had taken half the village, and what frightened her most wasn't the death itself. It was the strange, quiet calm that followed. No one screamed anymore. They only prayed. And yet, the prayers had stopped working. Elara was the only healer left. The others had either fallen ill or fled into the woods, claiming the air itself was cursed. But Elara couldn't leave. Something deep within her, an old curiosity she could never silence, told her there was a secret hidden in this sickness. Something ancient, something that didn't belong to gods or demons, but to the human mind itself. That evening, as the bells of St. Marin's Church fell silent for the first time in weeks, Elara made a decision that would forever mark her as cursed. She waited until the last of the priests had gone to rest, until the candlelight faded from their quarters and the chanting ceased. Then, barefoot and cloaked in black, she slipped into the undercroft, the cold cellar beneath the church where the old records were kept. The smell of damp parchment filled her lungs. Dust floated like gray snowflakes in the candlelight as she brushed her fingers across rows of forgotten scrolls. Most were prayers, blessings, or accounts of past miracles. But near the back, hidden behind a cracked stone slab, she found a wooden box sealed with red wax. It bore a single symbol, a hand, palm open with an eye in its center. The hand of heaven. She broke the seal. Inside were scrolls written in an older tongue, not Latin, not any language she'd ever studied. But the margins were annotated by a trembling hand, perhaps a priest who once tried to translate it. One line stood out, written in hurried ink. Fear is the oldest sickness. It rots the flesh before death comes. Elara's pulse quickened. She read further, candlelight flickering as if the words themselves disturbed the air around her. The scroll spoke of an ancient village that suffered the same fever centuries ago. Bodies cold, eyes open, smiling in death. And the cure, it claimed, wasn't in herbs or water or prayer. It lay in understanding the fear that had taken root in their hearts. It wasn't the illness that killed them. It was what they believed about it. She heard footsteps above, heavy ones. Elara blew out the candle and pressed herself against the wall. The cellar door creaked open, spilling faint torchlight down the stairs. "Who's there?" a voice demanded. "Father Marin." She froze. "Show yourself," he barked again, stepping down 2 stairs. The light of his torch illuminated the dust, but Elara remained hidden behind an old stone column. For a moment, the silence was unbearable. Then, a sound, faint but distinct, a parchment sliding across the floor. Father Marin moved toward it, and in that moment, Elara ran. She slipped behind the altar stairs, up through a side corridor, her breath barely a whisper. When she emerged outside, the moonlight was pale and cold, painting the church in a ghostly glow. Her heart pounded, her bare feet silent on the frozen ground as she ran toward the abandoned healer's hut by the river. There, in the solitude of broken bottles and dried herbs, she unrolled the forbidden scrolls again. The text spoke of rituals, not to cure but to calm. It said that when a community believes death has chosen them, the fear alone becomes enough to invite it. The priests, by calling it Heaven's Hand, had only deepened the curse. Elara understood now. If she wanted to save anyone, She had to make them believe they could be saved. Days passed. She began visiting the sick again, not with potions, but with stories. Gentle ones. She told them the fever was not divine punishment, but a test of courage. That fear was the poison, and peace was the antidote. Some smiled faintly. Some slept without shivering for the first time. But word travels fast in small villages, and the priests heard whispers of her strange methods, her refusal to pray, her forbidden scrolls, her claims that faith was not enough. By the fourth night, Father Marin summoned her. She entered the church to find the torches lit and every priest gathered. Her name echoed off the cold stone walls like a verdict. Elara, Father Marin said, his tone heavy with something between pity and rage. You have sinned. She bowed her head, though her heart beat like thunder. You speak against the hand of heaven, another priest said. You deny the holy cause of this trial. I don't deny heaven, Elara replied softly. I only question what hand it truly is. Gasps filled the hall. Father Marin's jaw tightened. You read what was forbidden. You enter the vault. I read because I wanted truth, she said. And I found it. The sickness isn't from God. It's from fear from us. It grows because we feed it. Blasphemy, shouted one of the elders. Father Marin raised his hand for silence. His eyes softened for a moment, as though he wished she'd chosen silence instead. Then, his voice dropped to a whisper that chilled her to the bone. You have brought darkness upon us, child. You will confess before dawn, or burn with the others. That night, they locked her in the chapel crypt. The air was damp, filled with the scent of candle wax and stone. Through a crack in the floor above, she could see the flickering light of the altar and hear the faint sound of villagers outside, weeping. But then, something strange happened. The weeping turned to laughter, soft at first, then louder. Elara pressed her ear to the crack. The sound didn't belong to the living. It was too calm, too content. The laughter of those who had died, echoing from nowhere and everywhere. She covered her mouth to keep from screaming. When dawn came, the priests opened the crypt, but Elara was gone. The shackles lay broken, the door unmarked. Only the forbidden scrolls remained, placed neatly on the altar, with one final line written in fresh ink. Fear creates its own gods, and sometimes they listen. That morning, the villagers awoke to find the fever gone. No one could explain it, but every night afterward, those who walked near the church swore they heard a woman's whisper in the wind. Gentle, soothing, almost like a lullaby. Do not fear what sleeps within you. It only wakes when you do. And in that sleepy, haunted village, peace finally returned. Not because the sickness had ended, but because the people had stopped believing it was still there. Yet somewhere deep beneath the church, the laughter continued. The villagers gathered in the square, clutching bundles of dried herbs wrapped in old cloth. The moon hung low and colorless, its pale light brushing over their faces. Faces hollowed by fear, by sleepless nights, by the memory of death breathing so close. Father Marin stood at the center, a torch raised in his trembling hand. The sacred smoke, he declared, will cleanse the air. The hand of heaven will turn merciful once more. Behind him, a dozen fires were lit. A thick gray smoke began to rise, curling toward the sky in slow, hypnotic spirals. It smelled of sage and bitterness, but beneath that, something else. A faint sweetness, almost like decay wrapped in perfume. Elara watched from the edge of the crowd. Her hood was pulled low, her hands clasped tightly around the strap of her satchel. She knew these herbs. They grew only on the northern hills, where soil never healed and birds never sang. Burned in small amounts, They were harmless. But in the quantities she saw now, the smoke was dangerous. It dulled the senses, slowed the heartbeat, and filled the lungs with a strange heaviness. A false calm. But what disturbed her more wasn't the smell. It was the sound. The smoke wasn't silent. It hummed. At first, Elara thought it was the wind, the low tone that always followed the valley's breath after dusk. But the longer she listened, the clearer it became. It wasn't wind. It wasn't the crackle of fire. It was a tone, deep and human, like dozens of voices humming softly beneath the smoke. And it was growing louder. Hours passed. The villagers began to sway gently as the fumes thickened. Children stopped crying. Even the dogs fell quiet. Only the smoke moved now, and that eerie hum that seemed to seep through every window, every stone, every thought. Elara stumbled back, her vision blurring. Her mind began to play tricks. She saw faces forming in the smoke, mouths open as if singing. Their eyes shimmered like reflections in dark water. She tried to call out, to warn them, but her voice vanished into the hum. That night, as the fires burned down and the villagers finally returned to their homes, Elara stayed awake in her hut. The hum still echoed faintly across the fields. It didn't fade. It followed. By dawn, 5 more people were dead, their lips curved into soft smiles, their eyes open and glistening as if they'd seen something beautiful before the end. Elara went to the well, desperate to breathe clean air, but the smoke lingered even there. She knelt beside the water and stared at her reflection. For a moment, she thought she saw another face staring back, her own, but older, paler, with eyes that no longer belonged to her. Then she heard it, a hum, faint and trembling, rising from her own throat. She clapped a hand over her mouth, terrified. The sound didn't stop. It vibrated in her chest, spreading like a second heartbeat. She stumbled to her knees, coughing, trying to force it out, but the moment she exhaled, the hum grew louder. "No," she whispered, trembling. "Not me." The humming in the distance swelled in response, as if answering her. That night, she went to Father Marin. The church was filled with the scent of burned herbs, the smoke still trapped in the rafters like a restless spirit. "You must stop the burning," she said, her voice weak but steady. "It's not cleansing the air, it's feeding something." Father Marin turned slowly, his eyes red from sleeplessness. "The smoke is our salvation," he said. "No one fears anymore. Look at them, they die in peace." "Peace," she spat, unable to contain herself. "They die singing." He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, not as a healer, not as the girl he'd once taught the sacred rites, but as a heretic. "You brought this curse with your forbidden words," he whispered. "Now you see demons where heaven sends mercy." Elara's breath shook. "Listen," she said, stepping closer. "If you stop the burning, the hum will fade. I've seen this before. The herbs don't purify. They awaken what sleeps in the dead." Father Marin smiled faintly, almost kindly. "Then let it wake. For if the dead must sing, at least they no longer scream." And with that, he turned away. That night, the fires returned, higher, brighter, endless. The entire village glowed under the weight of the smoke. The hum became a song now, wordless and sorrowful, echoing through the valley like a lullaby for the damned. Elara ran from house to house, pounding on doors, trying to wake those who'd already begun to drift into a trance. Their eyes rolled back. Their lips moved silently in rhythm with the humming. By midnight, she realized the sound wasn't coming from the smoke anymore. It was coming from them, the dying. Every breath they took released a faint tone, vibrating in harmony, as if the fever itself had become a choir. Elara stumbled into the square, surrounded by the fires and the singing. Her hands trembled as she covered her ears, but the sound came from within now, filling her bones, her blood, her mind. "Stop!" she screamed, but her own voice broke into a hum. The smoke above her pulsed like a living thing, swirling into shapes. Faces, hands, silhouettes of those who had already died. They moved slowly, tenderly, as if conducting the song of the dying world below. And then she saw him, Father Marin, standing before the altar, eyes open, tears streaming down his face. He wasn't praying. He was singing too. Elara collapsed to her knees. She pressed her palms together and whispered, not a prayer, but a promise. "If you must take them," she said to the unseen thing in the smoke, "take me too. But let me understand you first." The smoke bent toward her. The faces within it flickered like candlelight. And then silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that hurts your ears. The kind that means something has ended. Elara opened her eyes. The fires were gone. The village lay still under a blanket of gray ash. The hum was gone. But as she rose unsteadily, she realized something else. The silence wasn't real. It was only hiding the sound. If she listened closely, beneath her heartbeat, beneath the breath of the wind, she could still hear it, faint and far away. The song. It wasn't over. The smoke had only learned to whisper. In the days that followed, the fever stopped spreading. The villagers believed they were cured. They cleaned the ashes, rebuilt their fires, buried their dead. But every dawn, when a mist rolled in from the valley, a strange tune echoed faintly from the hills, as though the smoke itself had learned to breathe. And Elara, now marked by the hum in her chest, knew that the cure had only quieted the sickness, not destroyed it. Because sometimes she thought sickness doesn't end. It simply learns to sing softer. The fever had slowed, or so they believed. The villagers no longer burned the herbs, no longer sang the smoky hymns that once filled the valley. The air was lighter now, but it was the kind of light that comes after a storm, heavy with the scent of what it destroyed. Elara hadn't slept in 4 nights. The hum inside her chest had quieted, but never fully left. It pulsed now and then, like a second heartbeat that belonged to someone else. She'd begun to notice the silence, not the comforting kind, but the one that listens back. Every night, when she sat near her window to write her notes, she swore she could hear faint murmurs from beneath the church. They were prayers, or names, but it wasn't until the 5th night that the knocking began. 3 slow knocks. Then silence. Elara opened her door and found a woman standing there, her shawl soaked in dew, her eyes wide and red from weeping. "It's my boy," the woman whispered. "He hasn't slept in 2 days. His eyes stay open, but he dreams. He talks to them." Elara hesitated. "Them?" The woman nodded. "The ones beneath the church." The boy's name was Tomas. He couldn't have been more than 7. He lay in bed, unmoving but breathing. His eyes, glassy, half-focused, stared at the ceiling as if watching something no one else could see. His small lips moved constantly, whispering in a soft, cracked rhythm. Elara sat beside him, pressing her ear close. The whispers were faint, but the words were clear enough to chill her. "They are cold," the boy murmured. "They miss the light." Elara froze. "Who, Tomas? Who misses the light?" "The ones Father Marin buried too soon." Her blood ran cold. She turned to the mother, who stood trembling by the door. "When did this begin?" "After the smoke stopped," she said. "He said he could hear singing from the ground. I thought it was dreams, but he doesn't wake up anymore." Elara placed her hand on the child's chest. His heartbeat was steady, too steady, like a metronome keeping time for something else. His body was warm, alive, but the look in his eyes was wrong. Not fear, not sickness. It was waiting.